I think it's 100% preventable,
Wow.
mainly because we didn't have this 30 years ago. Very few people had this disorder.
Hmm.
So it's not like we're not, our body isn't evolving to have, uh, you know, these problems. It's our lifestyle that's doing it. Number one, the first thing you can do to prevent dementia or Alzheimer's is,
Okay, my guest on the freedompact podcast today is Dr. Patrick Porter, brain researcher, mental coach, best-selling author. Patrick, welcome to the freedompact podcast.
it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I wanted to have you on the show today because this is a topic that is becoming increasingly popular. I think even young people today are obsessed with this topic. It was always something when I was younger, brain health, these subjects. I always thought, I don't have to worry about these things yet. I'll worry about these things when I'm, 50, 60 years old. But what age do you think that people should start thinking about topics like brain health, like, brain fitness, mental wellness, Alzheimer's, what all these topics, what age should we start becoming conscious of these?
Well, I think children should actually start at 4 years old because that's when the brain starts to regulate.
Well,
So most people don't think of children as having stress, but because if you ever walked in, if you remember as a child walking in and your parents arguing, we feel that and it has an influence on us. So if a kid has ADD, ADHD, we need to start doing some brain fitness right away. Don't wait till it becomes a problem. There's something we call prehab, or I like to say it's better to have a breakthrough than a breakdown. So that's kind of what we're talking about. So as we have this, and then now, if that's not the case, then obviously, whenever you're feeling stress, having to make decisions, you know, uh, we actually say most people aren't using the full potential. They're using the full capacity maybe that they have for their brain, but they're not using its full potential. So that's where even for learning and things like that. But as we age, I mean, right now we're having people getting onset dementia at 30 years old. I mean, that's like when I was growing up, which was a lot older than you are. you know, I don't remember anyone in my family having being senile, and my grandparents lived to be 90s and things like that. So there's something about our lifestyle, and I think it's the stress we're under. So I think if you're having trouble sleeping with two-thirds of the world not sleeping right, it's a brain fitness problem. It's not a sleeping problem. It's exactly a sleeping problem. It's the brain isn't able to regulate. It's not able to get out of its own way and turn on the sleep mode. It keeps in its awake mode. So, and I think that the science actually shows the sooner you start to work on your brain health, the less likely it is for you to get dementia. And I always use the analogy of Tom Brady, who through his company called TBRX uses brain tap, and he always says it's better to have prehab than rehab.
hmm.
So you don't have to remember, you don't have to have a breakdown. Every one of us has a brain, and we have to maintenance, and most people don't ever do anything. We used to think, of course, 20 years ago, nobody thought we could actually create a change to our brain. The old philosophy was, hey, if you're a carpenter, if you're a bookkeeper, you're a bookkeeper. You don't, or if you're an athlete, you're an athlete. But we now know the brain can change. It can learn, grow, and develop new neuron connections. So I think that if you have a brain, in one of you don't have to do brain tap or what I do, but there's a lot of ways we can talk about brain fitness. Number one is to regulate emotions, because right now there's this big problem out there in the world. They're calling it mental health. This mental health problems that we have. I believe, even though my degree's in psychology, I think we have a physiological problem, not a psychological problem. What I mean by that is the nervous system is so stressed out, it doesn't know how to change gears from this fight or flight to our rest and recovery mode. And so those people that are doing, like, let's say, physical exercise, maybe that's the way they release all that pent up tension and stress. That's really good for your brain. Now, the next thing they need to add is some kind of relaxation component so they get the neuroplasticity out of it. But we can go into a little bit more on that, but it's not like there's a certain age, because those age things have all went out the window, especially in the last 3 years. Some craziness has happened out there that has caused our brains to dysregulate.
Amazing. I want to dive into all of that practical stuff you talked about there, but before we get there, it is Alzheimer's Awareness Month. We talked about it there. When my traditional ideas around dementia, Alzheimer's, before I really looked into the topic, it was that it was this horrible disease that you either inherit or you don't. Um, is this something that is preventable? Is this something that we have any control over, any influence over, or are we almost subject to our fate with dementia and Alzheimer's?
I think it's 100% preventable,
Wow.
mainly because we didn't have this 30 years ago. Very few people had this disorder.
Hmm.
So it's not like we're not, our body isn't evolving to have, you know, these problems. It's our lifestyle that's doing it. And the main thing is, think of your brain in another way, is a mitochondria machine. And what mitochondria does to the cells, it absorbs energy and transmits energy. So if have a bad diet, number one, the first thing you can do to prevent this problem of dementia or Alzheimer's is your diet. You have to eat a diet rich in fats. You have to get rid of the sugar. I don't like to always tell people what not to do, but that's one thing you need to get rid of, because sugar kills the mitochondria. Fats, your brain is almost all fats. We also need to drink half our body's weight in ounces of water. So you can drink whatever else you want, but make sure during the day, if you weigh, let's say 150 pounds, you're drinking 75 ounces of water. That's going to be a big difference, because a lot of people, their biggest problem is dehydration. So we're not getting enough fluids right now. Also, we need to get out and get into light. The most underprescribed nutrient on earth today is light. People don't think of it as a nutrient, but every cell of your body needs light. To give your listeners an example, if you don't get to sleep by 10 o'clock at night, wherever you're at the planet, every hour before 12 is worth 2 hours after 12 for building melatonin. Your liver doesn't start cleansing until 11 o'clock, but you have to be asleep for it to happen. So if you don't go to sleep at before 11 o'clock, you don't get the same liver cleansing process. Now, your liver, even though we're not going to talk about it here as much, but the liver is directly linked to brain health. A lot of the functions of the liver affect the brain. And if you don't do something about your stress, you're going to have this problem. And I'll give you one example, just so the listeners understand. Your liver houses 25 grams of sugar. It's just sitting there, and it's waiting for that tiger to come up behind you. And then it dumps that sugar into your bloodstream so you can run away safely, and all the muscles use up that sugar, no problem. We're designed to have that happen maybe 4 or 5 times a week. Well, with social media and the news and everything that's going on in the world today, that's happening more than that in the morning. What happens to the other 24 grams of sugar that your body can't use, because you can only have one circulating teaspoon of sugar in the bloodstream? It has to go to the adipose tissue in fat, makes fat. So that fat then will downregulate all your nervous system, because it starts to create its own nervous system. Fat has its own intelligence. So when it's almost like something takes them over. So when somebody says, I can't believe I'm overweight, I don't eat any sugar, it's not what they're eating, it's what's eating them. So you have to learn just to give you an idea for the listeners that don't understand the biology of how this all happens, when that sugar is dumped into the system, the body has to create it has to then produce the buffering system of the body, has to then produce the way to save you from all that sugar. And then we have an insulin drip. So the body starts saying, you know what, they're stressed all the time. Let me just drip this insulin all day long. Well, then what happens is the adrenals burn out. And then, so it's all a biological problem. But people are telling people it's a psychological problem. The problem is that they're not handling their stress appropriately. And they're not, basically, there's a saying, 97% of what's going to happen to you tomorrow, we know about today, but most people pretend they don't know. So everything becomes a shock to them. So one of the best things you can do is start shifting your awareness. Life isn't a series of threats. Life is a series of challenges. We have a thinking immune system. So when you think about autoimmune, they know, just as one example, they sold 40% more allergy medicine when they started advertising on the Weather Channel here in America, because that triggered people psychosomatically. So the brain created the reaction because your immune system is not just located in one place, it's everywhere in every cell. So if you have and if you're constantly looking at your life as a series of threats, your body is now cannibalizing itself. That's going to lead to dementia. It's going to lead to Alzheimer's. These are all people want to deal with. They want to deal with the end result, Alzheimer's, but it started years before you got that. Like they say, if you can't smell peanut butter, or if you're smelling toast, these are ways that people know. But when that happens, that means you're already in the throes of it. We've got to, you don't need to be able, if you can spell peanut butter now, congratulations, but still work on your brain. Let's get it fixed so you can do better, because if your brain's working better, guess what? Everything else is working better. Your parasympathetic's working better. That's how you downregulate and rest, recover, and relax. Where with 2/3 of the world not sleeping, like I said earlier, rest is when your body incubates its superpowers for the day. That's when you get all your neurotransmitters. So if you don't have your neurotransmitters, you're not going to feel good. You're going to be an angry, upset person because you're going to be down regulating. And all this actually affects the genetic system, the epigenetics. In every 40 seconds, most people don't realize this, but every 40 seconds, every gene pair in your body adapts. It adapts to the food you're consuming, the thoughts you're thinking, the people you're around, the buildings you're in, everything. There's not one thing that doesn't play into that role. So when somebody says, what's it going to take? It's going to take a lifestyle to make this change. It's not going to, most people want to take a pill, but you can't have a pill without the skill. Yeah. You've got to have the skill, because the body eventually is going to become immune to that pill. That's why they keep coming up with different pills, because our body isn't designed. The most powerful pharmacy is between your ears, not on the shelf at a corner drugstore. You have the most powerful pharmacy. You can make yourself feel good, or you can make yourself sick, depending upon your thoughts.
No, this is something that I've spoken at length about with Darren O'Lean, about this idea of, if there was a magical pill that, well, not even a magical pill, if there was a pill that contained all the right all the right nutrients, all the right vitamins, all the right minerals, and someone could take that pill, they would in a heartbeat. But they don't want to do the work to actually go out and consume all those things that would be in that pill.
Right.
You mentioned there about the importance of diet and the role it plays in Alzheimer's. Now, you mentioned two things, and one I think everyone would agree with and can understand the rationale for, and that's that, the dangers of sugar. But when you mentioned the importance of fats, I think for a lot of people who don't really already understand this topic, fat is a scary word to a lot of people when they don't understand it. So let's define that. When you're saying good fats, what does that mean?
Well, one of the best ways to get good fats is directly how the fish get it. Get it through blue-green algae or spirulina. Greens are one of the best ways to get it, and you're going to also get the nutrients. So I always tell people, start the day off with a green drink. Actually, Daryl is a good friend of mine, so I do his little concoction, the little vitamin C. But I do that before I do the greens. But there's a lot of other things you can do. But that's one. And if you're going to do fish, you got to make sure it's from a good source. Fish oils, because there's a lot of negatives now. The pollution that we have today. But then eat foods that are high in fat, good fats. I'm not talking about Lay's potato chips or something like that. I mean, that's terrible for you. And seed oils are probably the worst thing. They're now saying they're worse than sugar.
Wow.
So when you think about seed oils and what they do to the body, one example for the listeners, they did a study on peanut oil, because a lot of people think peanut oil is like a healthy thing because the studies show it wasn't in the veins. But then every monkey died in that study 3 months later because all the oils deposited in their capillaries. But they didn't tell you that. They just went to town making everything with peanut oil, so because it was more, the study was more for marketing than it was for really health. Yeah. So we have to really look at that. But I think that greens are one way to do it, and they're so available now that's the direct source. The other is to eat fruits that are dark in nature, dark fruits, because they have things in there that are good. I always tell people, if you really want to know the best diet, there's a show called I Love Lucy. Go and watch that and look at them when Lucy's eating lunch, she's eating a half a sandwich and a little drink. She doesn't have this big gulp, this 40-ounce
Yeah.
drink, and she's got this burger that the whole family could split, and a plate of fries that, could feed an army, and here, of course, everybody says, I'll say, hey, is that a good restaurant? They go, oh yeah, they give you a lot of food. People now judge a good restaurant by the amount of food, and we can see that in the bellies of every person in America, pretty much, 90% of the people. And it's sad, because when I travel around the world, I see wherever there's fast food, weight gain follows. So when you think about the closest you can get to nature, the better. So greens, vegetables, and then if you can eat, one thing the brain or the body likes is a variety of colors. So you should look at your plate and see a rainbow of colors. These are just simple things you can do. If you can get a good source of walnuts, even that aren't mold, I know there's a lot of them that have problems with that too. There's all these things you got to work on, but I have some spray that I spray on things that, neutralizes all that stuff, because now, unless you're sourcing it yourself, you just don't know. But also good sources of meat. I'm not a vegetarian because, unfortunately, I've never seen too many. I've seen a handful of healthy vegetarians, but not too many. And but if you can get, and I'm not saying eat meat at every meal, at least once a week, have a good, steak or something like that that's farm raised, that isn't, because your brain, there's certain things you get out of that. Now the problem is that, or buffalo is even better if you can get that, because buffalo isn't cow. So you have, you want to have foods that are going to feed the cells of your body. And like I said earlier, light is the most underprescribed nutrient. So if you don't have like red light therapy and infrared and things like that, get outside at sunrise and sunset. They've actually seen that before the UV rays and things get too severe, and then just get out there and walk around. If you can get out barefoot too, we don't need as much food as what everybody thinks. We're kind of nomadic. Our bodies are still the same as they were 200,000 years ago. They haven't really changed. And we didn't have a convenience store on the corner of every, block in our cities back then. So we might even go, I like intermittent fasting. Like, I usually don't eat till 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I try to eat in a 6-hour to 8-hour window. I find that because that creates that autophagy, that gets rid of those cells. But sleep is the only way the brain detoxes.
Yeah.
So if somebody asks me, what's the number one thing I can do to prevent Alzheimer's? Fix your sleep. And that's what we do. That's what our company does most. The biggest side effect of my technology is sleep. So the reason that sleep is so important is that's when you're going to build up your neurotransmitter bank account. If you don't get the different brainwave states, which happen during sleep, you don't make enough of the 54 different neurotransmitters you need the next day. And if those aren't available, the body will basically downregulate. You'll have anger, fear, resentment. You'll have and as soon as you start getting into those negative states, one thing happens: you stop breathing. So breath work is probably one of the best things you can learn to do. If you've ever sat next to somebody that has never done any work on themselves, most people hold their breath most of the time. They don't even realize it. And they're sitting there, and their angers, they're thinking about what they're going to say next. They're not listening, but they don't realize that they've set a pattern up of non-breathing. And we need to learn to breathe through situations. When I'm working with a child, for instance, coming into the clinic or something like that, I tell them, we need you to get into martial arts. If it's a boy, typically. If it's a girl, I say you need to go do yoga or dance. Some way they're not moving enough. We know the brain needs movement. 2 hours of sitting, 10% of the oxygen in your brain has now left. So when somebody says sitting is the new smoking, it's actually worse, because smokers actually have to go outside and stand to smoke.
Yeah.
So, and so there's a lot to it. But I think that it has to be a lifestyle of activity, proper nutrition. And I'm not a nutritionist. We do have people on staff that are better at that than me. And of course, Darren is a really good one. So, I mean, he's got the book that talks about all of our fatal conveniences and things.
Yes,
So,
yeah.
I mean, you have all this information out there, and I think people get confused. And you have to look at the source of the book or the material you're reading, because if it's supported by any government agency, I don't read it, because they've been bought out.
Mm.
They've been, I mean, our here, here, I don't know what it is around the world, but in the US, our food pyramid is meant to take small cows or pigs and make them big hogs and cows that they can sell at market as quickly as possible. They're not meant to make them healthy, because they're not living long.
Yeah.
If you want a long life, you got to look at the people that are out there, like yourself or others that are doing podcasts that are sharing longevity tips, and then try it for yourself. Nothing's better than your own experiment, but you got to be willing to change, and you got to be most people aren't willing to get through that pain stage of change that happens. They let their old patterns stand in their way, and that's where we need to break up that patterning.
I want to tell you guys about London Nootropics. Now, I use Nootropics every single day, and my favorite way of doing that is through London Nootropics. London Nootropics are a company that make adaptogenic coffees made with things like lion's mane mushroom, ashwagandha, and so much more. They make amazing tasting coffee, and there are 3 coffee blends, all with different benefits and properties. The first one is Flow. I love using Flow. I drink Flow to get my mind right, to promote mental clarity and focus. It's like a productivity coffee. I drink it and I get to work and I smash through my work for the day. The next one I want to tell you about is called Mojo. This is good for promoting things like physical endurance, strength, energy, basically everything you need when you're on your way to the gym. It's like the ultimate natural pre-workout, but without all the negative side effects and jitters. I use it on my way to the gym. The third one is Zen. Now, I use this in the evening. It's made with ashwagandha and promotes relaxation, helps combat stress, and really helps you wind down in that sort of final third of the day. So, if you are interested and you think that you could benefit from any of these adaptogenic coffees, I encourage you all to head to londonnootropics.com and enter the code freedompact at checkout for 20% off. Now, I'm not sure how long this code is going to be active, so if you think that any of these coffees sound like they can help you in any way, I would encourage you to take a minute now and go and check them out. And if you are interested, the code freedompact gets you a whopping 20% off. Now, back to the episode. Amazing. So, if we get back to, as you mentioned there, it's a lifestyle. Let's go to sleep first. We've talked a little bit about its importance and the role it plays in, as we mentioned there, preventing dementia. Sleep, massive topic for me. Something I struggled with for many years. In fact, I would say this podcast almost started with my obsession with sleep. I sort of built an Instagram account based off of sharing my favorite sort of sleep information. So it was very interesting to me, and I'd love to talk about it. I think now, because of the work done by many people like yourself, like the Andrew Hubermans, the Matthew Walkers of the world, who are sort of waking people up, no pun intended there, to this topic and the importance of sleep. I think everyone is in agreement that it is almost the cornerstone of your health, but a lot of people still struggle with it. What do you think are some of the biggest mistakes that people are making when it comes to their sleep?
I think the number one biggest mistake is they watch things that are exciting, either whether it be on their phone, their tablet, their TV, that are exciting,
Right.
that are triggering the norepinephrine and the cortisol and the dopamine. And then they think they're just going to walk into their bedroom, close their eyes, and go to sleep. It's different. If I think that 2 or 3 hours before bed, you should be going around the house turning off lights. If you and just telling your brain, hey, I'm going to be going to sleep soon. I mean, I don't think everybody has to wear these glasses that they have, because some people don't bring in enough light anyway. And the only way we bring light into the brain is usually a lot of the light comes in through our eyes, and we do need blue light. Without blue light, we'll have seasonal affective disorder. So I think there's a bad rap about everybody. There's 20% of the population that better wear those glasses, or they're not going to sleep at all now because they're too stimulating. But they're, not everybody. But the reality is that you shouldn't be watching your screens right before bed. probably, and they don't know how to sleep. They think they're supposed to go brain dead. So what I teach people is to do the 4-8 breath before sleep. And we need to educate our nervous system because nobody's training our nervous system. Most people wait for life to happen to them instead of through them.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is I'm a martial artist. So when you think about flow states and somebody attacking you, if I can get somebody angry, I know I've won, because and that's any negative emotional state. So when you're laying in bed, if you focus on the 4-8 breath, the breath in is going to trigger your sympathetic system. So you might feel a little stress, little fear, little anxiety. That's fine. Acknowledge it. It's not a bad thing. We need that. And then breathe out to the count of 8 and really release the parasympathetic system, because what will happen is eventually there'll be no more stress. You'll be breathing in relaxation, you'll be breathing out relaxation. And that can sometimes take up to 15 minutes. And that's okay, because that 15 minutes will give you much better sleep than if you're listening and you don't have a brain tap, do that tonight. I guarantee you're going to have the best sleep you've had. Now in the morning, we recommend like the breath of fire and maybe some catalyzing breath, like deep breath in through the nose, exhale out through the mouth for 30 reps. And then you hold the breath and you do the 3 reps of that, and you'll trigger digital coffee is what I call it. You can trigger your own, trigger like that. And then in the middle of the day, I recommend for brain regulation using the box breath. These are just the 3 that I teach my people because they're easy and they don't have to have a machine. They don't have to have their smartphone. And I think that what most people do is they just think life, that like their body, when we're younger, yeah, you can, kids fall asleep playing with the blocks on the floor and they sleep in all weird positions. But as we age, we start to psychologically get in the way of our sleep. And I think some people need to take a warm bath, every once in a while just to get the toxins out. Don't drink anything, all the things that you probably told your people about, those are all really standard. But I think you got to actively sleep. And if you wake up in the middle of the night, big deal. Yeah. Do your breath work, go back to sleep. It doesn't matter, but if you make a big deal of it, then the brain will make a big deal of it. Yeah. And when somebody tells me, oh, I got to get up because I got to go to the bathroom, that's a brain regulation problem. You should be able to drink a gallon of water and go to sleep and not wake up in the middle of the night. We have a circulating pump with our kidneys. We don't have to go to the bathroom at night. That's a lie people tell themselves. Your body knows how to regulate that. So our bodies are designed for survival. We didn't always have a tap water or whatever. I don't drink tap water, obviously, but you don't always have access to clean water. So our body is designed to hold on to it, not to eliminate it. So when you think about these things, and it's not uncommon for people to wake up at 2:00 in the evening at night, they don't realize that that's also a time when the body increases the temperature 2 degrees. Whoever you are, wherever you're at around the world. So if your brain's dysregulated, let's say it goes to 3 degrees or 4 degrees, you're waking up throwing the covers off because you're so hot, but it's a brain regulation problem. And so once you regulate your brain, you won't have those. It's just a natural cycle, but if you're dysregulated, your brain goes way out of whack and then you got to bring it back.
When I was reading about your work, the one thing that jumped out to me was this idea of sound and light therapy and its relation to the brain's neuroplasticity. I think a lot of people listening, like myself, when they read something like that, they're kind of sort of shocked to the idea, don't really understand it. Tell us a little bit about that before we dive into it. What is the sort of premise behind this?
Okay, so when I went to India the first time, and by the way, after I was voted the Researcher of the Year last year in India for our stuff we do, because we're taking ancient traditions and making modern technology. So Dr. Varun said to me, he goes, Porter, you're cheating. People spend years meditating. They just put this machine on and they do it. And I said, Dr. Varun, I said, have you ever meditated to a candle? Oh yeah, all the time. I said, well, you're cheating. He goes, what do you mean? I said, that's just the technology you had at the time. I said, a candle flickers at 10 hertz frequency. All fires do. You probably know people that say, that fire's mesmerizing, or I can't take my eyes off it. That's because we have mirror neurons. And those mirror neurons are always evaluating our environment. And then our body matches that environment. So that 10 hertz frequency in the brain, and guess what? Our body is designed to absorb light energy. That's what it does. It's also designed to transmit light energy. Every person you meet is an 8-10 nanometer light generator. So some people are energy vampires. They don't have enough energy, so they absorb the light of others. And you know them because they're the negative Nellies, and they're always robbing you of your energy. We call them energy vampires, right? And then you have people that walk in the room, it gets a little brighter because they have more energy. Our cells, they transmit energy. So the reason we need light is our eyes are designed to absorb light energy. That's what they do. And that our eyes are not just attached to our brain, they are the brain. Now, the reason we put it in the ears, and some people go, why do you put light in the ears? What's that? Well, every cell of your body has a chromophore, which means it has a light receptor. And that light receptor is absorbing light energy. And it has a little battery. That's what it has a little battery in there, that chromophore that's storing the energy. So in the ears, though, there's pathways to the whole rest of the body, just like there are in the eyes. An iridologist could look at the eyes, an iridologist could look at the ears, and so but the reason for the ears is we need energy in the brain to do the work. Most people do not understand yoga. They think they're doing yoga for exercise. That's not the reason it was invented. Yoga was invented to help people meditate because you need energy to meditate. Most people don't have enough energy. You've probably heard the expression, "Oh, Jimmy's so tired he can't sleep." And that's what's happening to adults today. They don't have any energy in their brain, so they can't sleep. So the brain keeps waking them up saying, "We need energy, we need energy, we need energy." So what we're going to do is we're going to deliver ATP direct. So you can eat food, you can drink water, you can convert it to energy and make ATP to the cells, or you can just deliver it directly. So all the blood in your ears actually goes directly into the brain next. That's what regulates brain temperature. So if you want to you can also wear a skull cap. There's a lot of ways to get light into the brain, but for a headset, that was the best way we could find, was put it in the ears. And what we found was if we change the frequencies. So people look at our light and they go, why are you using 470 nanometer light and 650 nanometer light? Well, mainly because those two lights are the most prevalent light in mornings and evenings. So they're going to work to reset the body's natural biochemistry. But also, those lights in the ears are changing every 2 minutes to a different Auger frequency, because the body is always trying to figure out by frequency response what's going on. So our cells go into cell danger response. So think of cell danger response like having a big fire. That's your mitochondria, but then you put a bunch of wet leaves over top of it. That the fire's still burning under there, but it's not doing as good job. So we want to get in. Of course, the eyes have the most mitochondria per centimeter, but the brain has the most mitochondria. So if we want to feed the brain, what it needs more than anything else is light, because it doesn't have to pass by any barrier. Our body is designed, every cell has receptors for it. So it's not like we have to train the brain to do it. The brain does this naturally. So we created biocular, kind of like binaural. It does the same thing. Those are just off a little bit because our brain is always synchronizing the two hemispheres. And neuroscience tells us that we're making up 80% of what we see because reality is happening too fast. So we keep making it up. We keep making it up. Now, some of it's true, but most of it isn't. If you go to the kitchen and you can't find the salt shaker and somebody else is in the dining room, you say, "Hey, where's the salt shaker?" They say, "It's right there on the counter." You go, "No, it isn't." You keep yelling back and forth. Finally, they walk out, right in front of you is the salt shaker. That's because your brain didn't render it. In psychology, they call it a stigmata. So that means a blind spot. So when we have these blind spots, we all have them. There's different tests you can take to see where your blind spot is. But that's just a blind spot in physical reality. We have blind spots in psychological reality. We have blind spots in everything. But the other thing that people don't understand is when you meditate, and we've done over 30,000 brains in the last 10 years since we've had the better technology to do it. We've been doing this since the 80s, but the last 10 years, we've been recording and documenting when somebody meditates without light therapy, without using something like our brain tap, we know that 30% of their brain shuts down unless they're using some meditation technique and I can count on one hand the number of people that meditate, they keep their brain awake. Yeah. And that includes gurus in India. Because what happens is the brain is trained to downregulate. It's an energy hog. It uses 25% of the energy. So if it gets a chance to shut down, it shuts down. As an example, if you know how to use, how to speak more than one language, you have a brain circuit that stayed awake. If you didn't learn a new language by the age of 7, that brain circuit never recovers, or they haven't found a way to reactivate it. Because when you think about learning a language, nobody that I know as a baby learned a language by going to English class. They absorbed English. And as an example, my science officer, when we went to India a few years back, he had never been there before. He speaks 5 languages. He's a super smart guy. But we're there for 3 weeks. He's talking to a guy in Hindi. And I said, Francisco, when did you learn Hindi? He said, we've been here for 3 weeks. He had the circuit. So he basically absorbed a language in 3 weeks. I said, how many languages do you speak? He says, I speak almost, if I'm around, he was a flight attendant when he was in college. He said, but if I was going to a country, if I spent a couple of weeks there, I'd know their language. Because that's the way our brain works. It doesn't, vibratory information and frequency response are going to be the future of learning as well as health, because we don't learn the way they think we do. Our schools are still in the 1800s. You know, our brain is much more capable than what we're being told.
What I'm looking at my notes here, and one other thing that's sticking out to me is this idea of the relationship between, or the use of music and brain health / cognitive decline. What is the approach there? What do we know? What have we learned between the relationship between brain health and music? Is that, you know, is that even something we should consider? That sounds like something I've never heard about this before.
Yeah, well, there's something called the Mozart effect, if somebody wants to look that up in research. And what they showed was when you play that Baroque classical music, which now could be any new age kind of music without, you know, a certain rhythm and cadence, they call it 10 cycle music. So what it does is it synchronizes the hemispheres, because we're always trying to find balance and harmony, even though some people don't appear to be doing that. Their brain is still trying to figure that out. Even when I wrote programs for the state of Arizona here for DUIs, I basically taught them from a book called Finding Your Perfect High, which is all about people get high because they want to get balanced, not because they want to get unbalanced. They're thinking it's going to get them balanced, but it doesn't. So music does that naturally. So there's a lot of studies. Now, we did a study in Brazil with 1,000 students, and we showed that when the music plays, the brain regulates. But when the music turns off, it goes right back. But when you put an algorithm like our algorithm into it, it takes 72 hours to regulate back to the stress brain. That's why we call it brain fitness, because you got to train the brain. The music is just a frequency that we're responding to. It's like going to the ocean, and we love being by the ocean because we're getting a 10 cycle response. We're creating alpha. We're creating acetylcholine, the fall in love kind of neurotransmitter, that in the feel good neurotransmitter. So we're sitting there, and it's our body's basically creating it because we're in that environment. That's our body's always basically vibrating and teaming with its environment.
So knowing this, is it possible to create sort of specific, sort of the optimal musical piece then that is beneficial?
Oh yeah, we've done it. We have over 600 sessions that are music only, that have the algorithm in the background, and we have over 100 sessions just for gamma. So if somebody has Alzheimer's, we'll probably find they have almost zero. You should have at least 2 to 3% gamma while you're awake. And think of gamma as the bass drum to the brain. So what happens as people age, they lose their gamma response, and then the brain dysregulates. Because could you imagine having a band without a bass drum? You know, that's what happens when you lose gamma. So gamma is just in the background, just always steady. It's steady Eddie doing its thing.
So you've mentioned this term, brain fitness, a few times. A lot of people may not know what that means exactly. Explain this concept and what comes to mind when you hear the words brain fitness.
Right. Well, we all know, you know, back in the 1800s when Dr. Kellogg started the first health food store, everybody thought he was crazy. Why should we take supplementation and do all these things? We now take that for granted. In the 70s, when they started this exercise movement, people like Kathy Smith and people like that started teaching people how to exercise. I still remember going to my family in Iowa and saying, I'm going for a run. They go, why are you doing that? I go, I gotta stay in shape. I'm going to play football. And he goes, why don't you come out on the farm and work, you know? But we don't. So now everybody, I don't know too many people who would argue with being physically fit. Now we're coming to an age where we're figuring out that we need to work our brains. And what we're talking about there is neurologically working them out. So how do we keep our neurology or our neuroplasticity? When you think of neuroplasticity, think of the brain's capacity to work. And that means increasing the energy in the brain. Like in our dementia study that we did, where we took every person in the study off dementia, in 6 weeks, we increased their what they call their neuroplasticity score by 39% in 6 weeks. That's by feeding the brain what it needed most, light, and regulating it with sound and vibration. So the brain needed that. Now, if we only did it once, no big deal, but you have to do it. The nervous system itself, which is the brain, and the brain isn't just located between the ears. The brain, the first dysregulation happens in the heart. There's 40,000 neutrino cells in the heart. That's a brain. And if you don't have heart rate variability, I can tell you the next thing that's going to happen is dementia, because that's the communication between the heart and the brain. Now, the second biggest brain is your gut. There's more neuron connections in your gut than there are in the brain between your ears. So if you don't have good gut health, that's why I said diet is so important. So when you think about, everybody wants to get like the pill, right? So the pill goes into the gut, it's dysregulated. You're in high sympathetic. Guess what happens to that drug or that nutrient? It gets flushed out of the system, because when you're in high sympathetic, you're not digesting and metabolizing and utilizing the foods. When somebody says you are what you eat, no, you are what you digest, metabolize, and use. You're not what you eat, because a lot of people eat a bunch of crap and they become that, but they're not really healthy. I mean, even some, a lot of vegetarians, and jokingly saying that earlier, a lot of vegetarians turn to sugars or things that are sugar based. They turn into sugar, carbohydrates, just because they're not meat.
Yeah.
And the reality is that we need at all costs slow down sugar. So fat, fiber, and when you think about fat, fiber, and protein, that should be the focus of anybody who's concerned about their brain. How much fat, how much fiber, how much protein. Fiber is especially when we move into the holidays, people should be increasing, not too fast, because it could act like cement in the system. You don't want to be clogged up. But if you start increasing your fiber, you better increase your water, so you can flush it out, because fiber will absorb those toxins and it will absorb the excess sugar.
The last thing I really wanted to ask you about before we let these guys listening know where they can find out more about BrainTap and your work is the relationship between stress, living a stressful life, and I suppose your ability to manage that stress and its effect on cognitive decline.
Right. I don't believe we have a stress problem in the world today. I believe we have a capacity problem, because we can handle the stress, but if you don't ever down-regulate, where you don't ever do some kind of mindfulness practice or physical exercise, you've got to do something to, like a lot of people can identify with, you get into this certain place and then you go for a good cry. Then afterwards you feel better, right?
Yeah.
Well, or you have a good laugh. Somebody tells a joke when things are tense. That's their nervous system re-regulating. So think of it like we have to get our nervous system out of its patterns. If we keep in the same pattern, the brain will downregulate. We need stress to grow and learn and develop. So stress isn't a bad thing. We have to build our capacity for that stress. And what happens with most people is they keep, the old saying is they pray to God. You don't pray to God to get rid of your stress. You pray to God to give you the strength to handle your stress. So when you think about whatever is going on, we have the capacity. It's just we're not activating it. That's why most people know somebody that was very negative and they were, nobody wanted to be around them. Then they started exercising, eating well, and they go, wow, this guy made a total turnaround. Well, yeah, his physiology changed and now his psychology changed. And then there's other people that their psychology changes and then they go out and they start getting physically fit, eating well. So what I've learned over the years and 40 years of doing this is, why don't you do them all right now? It's not one of them that's going to do it. You've got to do them all. You can't just do physical fitness. I've known people that eat really well. Eat better than I do, but their family members still get cancer. They still get sick. Because they're eating that way so they won't get sick. Yeah. That'd be like me saying, don't think of a dancing pink elephant. you're going to think of that dancing pink elephant. So you should be eating just to know that your body needs the nutrients to provide you the life that you want to live. And that lifestyle should be one of joy and happiness and health, and focus on that. And if you're not getting that, what do you need to do to upgrade your diet so you can have that energy to do that? Because we really do live in an energy economy. If you don't have energy, you become negative Nelly, right? And you can't, nobody wants to be around you because you'd be like Igor on Winnie the Pooh or something. We want to make, when you have energy, people love to be around high energy people. And so become one of those high energy people and you'll be in demand. That's the way it works.
What I love about episodes like this is when there's so much actionable advice. You've given so much actionable advice today. There's so many takeaways that people can come away from listening now and can start implementing. But if I were to ask you, if you imagine a listener who's brand new to this topic right now, they've never really thought about brain fitness, they've never really thought about, the possibilities of cognitive decline. If you were to issue one challenge to our listeners today to come away from this podcast, and maybe it's something they start thinking about more consciously, maybe it's something they implement into their routine, or is the one challenge that you would issue to our listeners today?
Start doing breath work. Start figuring out how to. Most people do not know how to breathe, and that's a key to life, right? I mean, we take it for granted. We can only go so long without a breath. But I find that when people start regulating their breath, their sleep improves, because their sleep is bad at night because they're not sleeping because they're snoring or they're breathing. But when you practice breathing, that carries over into your sleep. So practice those breath techniques that I talked about earlier in the show. That would be the next thing. If you don't want to go do the 14-day trial, do those three breaths during the day. And you can do the box breath while you're driving your car, riding your bike. It doesn't matter. You can do those while you're active.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Just a side note, I wonder, have you ever read the work or maybe spoken to James Nestor at all?
No.
So he wrote a book on breath, and I've done a podcast with him. It was a smash hit of a book. You should look it up. And I'd love to hear you guys talk. So, maybe you could have a conversation on your podcast. Maybe I could connect you both. But
that'd be great. Love to. Yeah, because we promote breath work. We have Breath Source. And some other people that we put on our app, because I want people to learn about it. I mean, and I'm not a breath expert, but I do it every day, but I just haven't got my certificate or whatever, but sure. I've been doing it. I'd studied with Yogi Bhajan for 5 years doing Kundalini breathing, and continue to do it because I think that's what really opened up my brain, getting more oxygen into the system.
Amazing. Well, I'd love to, two people, James Nestor and Patrick McEwen, two people I'd love to see you have a conversation with. Hopefully I can connect you there. Before we go, please let everyone listening and watching where they can find more from yourself, where they can connect with you and find more of your work.
Yeah, if they go on any social media and put @Dr. Patrick Porter, they'll see a lot of videos that I've done, other podcasts and things like that, and some that I've done with other people as well. And they can go to braintap.com, or drpatrickporter.com is my website. They can check us out there, and we're pretty much all over the world. So if they want to try something out and they let us know, we probably have an office. We have 4,000 clinics around the world, so we can help them out.
I will make sure all that is linked in the description below. Dr. Patrick Porter, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today, sir. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been great.